This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the back Zurhaar, he backs it, he kicks it, all the floor from Dees. This is the speed of McKercher, 3 bounces down the wing, he keeps going, 4 bounces. Joining the chorus, the Can't Lose Kangas, AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back once again to North Pod after a big Centenary game, 100-year celebration against the Bulldogs Thursday night, which is an interesting one. Obviously, it is blockbuster, big time slot, but it is a TV product, so the crowd was probably a little bit disappointing. You could see that at the top level there was, half the top level not being used. It certainly was not a full house, but in any case, good to be in prime time. 2 low-drawing Melbourne sides as well, for what it's worth. Obviously, North Melbourne, low-drawing. And the Dogs, probably not far above North Melbourne. St Kilda and North Melbourne, I feel like, are at that bottom rung, and then the Dogs are probably not far above that. A big night for the club, which was great, and then we put up a really good fight for three quarters, you'd probably say. No doubt you've watched the game by this. Thursday's certainly not my preference as a podcaster and someone who's working full-time, so this pod will be out on Sunday, quite a bit after the game, which is not usually what I would like to do, but it's taken me that long to be able to watch the game properly and do a bit of a review and then record this. So yeah, let's jump into it. A good contest, high scoring, free flowing footy for the most part. We saw Dennis Pagan do the pre-game rev up in front of many past and obviously present players, which was a pretty cool thing to see. Great celebration. I'll talk a little bit more about the Centenary element of this game a little bit later on, but for now, let's jump right into review. So team selection here is going to leave a fair bit to be spoken about. Normally it's, a change or two, but we had 5 changes, most of them forced, and I guess a bit to talk about within that. So Luke McDonald, Luke Parker, Jack Darling, George Wardlaw and Zach Fisher were all omissions. Zach Fisher, the only one that was not forced. I don't think he's playing fantastic football. I think it might have said managed. I can't recall exactly now, but certainly he was the only one that wasn't injured. McDonald copped that injury late in the game last week. Luke Parker went in for scans. Jack Darling's leg just wasn't quite up to it, and we know George Wardlaw unfortunately has the concussion to deal with. So that left us with a fair bit to do. Bailey Scott, Finbar Maley, Will Field, Zane Dersmer and Cooper Harvey were the inclusions. So I guess a bit to talk about there. I think Bailey Scott makes sense from the perspective of we've got so much experience coming out of the side. We don't want to be completely just replacing that with some inexperienced players. So Bailey Scott, although he has not been having a great season, he's been doing okay down the VFL, and I think it made sense to bring him in. He's somewhat reliable. You kind of know what the ceiling is going to be, but you also know what the floor is going to be, and I think that was probably the more important part. So Bailey Scott comes in, obviously plays off that wing alongside Dylan Stevens and some others throughout the game. Finbar Maley comes in to replace Jack Darling. I think it was fantastic that this wasn't just his first exposure. We've seen him earlier on in the year for a little stint, which, at a time like this becomes super important because all of a sudden he's at least got some exposed AFL experience to bring to the table, and I think he deserves his opportunity as that extra forward who can go into the ruck. We saw him play the second ruck, and it ended up being almost the primary ruck in the last quarter when Tristan Xerri went down, so I think that made sense. Will Field came in, you could say for Wardlaw or for Parker, but came in as the extra midfielder. The inside mid, both of those are inside mid players, so he has to come in and he gets a chance to prove himself or not, before the year is up. We know he's coming out of contract at the end of this year. He and the next one that I'm going to talk about actually are coming out of contract. So I thought it was important to get Will Field in for a stint before the year is up. I have no doubt that he'll play at least another game on the back of this, even if that's just because Wardlaw we take a conservative approach with. So he got a chance. And then Cooper Harvey is the other one I was going to mention there. Comes in with plenty to prove as well. Didn't play an AFL game at all last year, so is really fighting for that spot in the side, and I think he's been kicking a lot of goals at VFL level. Interesting the way that we used him some time off half back during this game, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And then the final omission, Zane Dersma. A lot of talk during the week that he may be a little bit disgruntled or unhappy with North Melbourne or where he's at with his footy. I think it's pretty hard to argue that he's been in good form. He has not. He hasn't really done a lot this year. And I think last year he made a fairly solid start, but found it really hard in the second half of the year as well. So he may be disgruntled, but I think there's also probably some people at North Melbourne that are disgruntled with him. So Zane Dersma, big game Zane, came in and has a chance to prove himself. Although he of the inclusions, he was probably the most quiet of the five, which doesn't really bode well given the amount that we invested in him in the draft. But in any case, it's a much more inexperienced side. You've got McDonald, Parker, Darling, and to a lesser extent Fisher, who are all really experienced players going out. And then Bailey Scott's the only really experienced player coming back in, the only one with more than 50 games. Wilfield's approaching. I think he might be up to 48, but certainly he's traded out a lot of experience from last week. And look where that got us last week anyway, I guess you could say. Like, it was a belting against Hawthorn. Let's see what the youth can do. It wasn't by choice, it was by need, but regardless, I don't think there could be too many complaints about the changes at the selection table. So then we get to the game itself. Obviously a disappointing result in the end. North Melbourne 13-7-85, defeated by the Dogs 20-14, 134. So a 49-point win in the end. And I think as I talk about the game, I really do believe that margin does flatter the Dogs a little. Not a lot, but a little bit. I think we were really competitive. I thought the first half was a really enjoyable half to watch. There was, like I mentioned off the top, some free-flowing football, some really good passage of play, obviously from both sides, but I thought we had some really nice passages as well. And the Dogs just kind of wore us away. They did kick away in the last quarter a touch, but we held our nerve for most of the game, and I think what was really pleasing was we didn't let them get a big run on. I guess let's talk about the game quarter to quarter as I usually do. I thought the way we started the game wasn't great. It wasn't. After the big Centenary setup, Dennis Pagan's given the big rev up, and then we conceded a couple of goals pretty early, which was disappointing. I thought Tommy Powell really needed to go back with the contest and put a spoil on. He didn't, and that allowed the Dogs to really just get a free-flowing kick out the back. I thought the defence just immediately sold themselves out for that uncontested mark out the back. Might have been Vandermeer that ended up taking that mark and goaling. The forward line had to compete better to keep it in because we won that initial clearance. But I mean, it's what we've always seen. The midfield group or the team defence was not up to it, and then out the back the Dogs got. And that wasn't a great start. But I thought we responded really well. Nick Larkey took a contested mark in the square and kicks a goal. I thought it was great to see that confidence that he built last week continued into this week. I think even in that contest, he was a bit out of position. It was a really nice mark, a great way to stamp ourselves or to get ourselves back into the game. And then what a quarter Nick Larkey ended up having. Just kept slotting him from everywhere or kept marking him everywhere, I guess. He took several contested marks in the quarter and was super dangerous. Had a shot at goal after the siren that would have made it 5 for the quarter. Wasn't quite able to hit that one. Just missed. But a 4-goal first quarter from Nick Larkey was super important. And it was super important that we steadied early after conceding those quick goals. I really enjoyed the energy that we were bringing to the game after that nervous start. I think of the inclusions, Wilfield and Bailey Scott and Maley and Harvey all had early touches. Not to say they were having absolutely fantastic games or by any stretch, but I thought all those 4 got involved early, which is important when you're an inclusion and a newer player. You want to get a touch early and sort of settle your nerves a little bit, which I think they did. We saw that Maley was the second ruck in Darling's absence. Nick Larkey, like I mentioned, kicked through in the trot and unfortunately then seemed to do some kind of lower leg injury. It was unclear if it was a knee or a calf, but he did look proppy for the remainder of the game after that. There was speculation on the call that it was a calf, but then he looked to go and get some strapping on his knee. So I'm not too sure exactly what the prognosis was during the game, but that certainly did hamper his ability to move around the ground. He was still able to take some marks after that point, but certainly his impact was dampened by the fact that he just looked like he couldn't quite cover the ground, which was unfortunate because it looked like he was in for a really big game against O'Donnell. The Dogs did swap Lob onto him at times, which looked like a far better matchup, but I guess then they're kind of trading out their best intercept marker. So you've got to rob Peter to pay Paul, and that's the position that you want to put opposition sides in. Nick Larkey was super dangerous in this game. I thought Will Phil had a really nice inboard kick. He hit Dersma, and then Dersma hit Curtis on the lead-up, and we equalise after looking a little bit shaky in the middle part of that quarter. That was a nice passage to see Will Phil and Dersma involved to get Paul Curtis into the game. And then I think probably for me what was our best moment of the game, a long ball goes into the Western Bulldogs forward line. Sam Darcy looks like he's going to take a mark, and Dylan Stephens, who's absolutely gut ran to that spot, was able to put enough of a spoil on that Sam Darcy foils the mark. He didn't get massive purchase, but he ran back with the fly, got enough on it, and like I said, Sam Darcy spills the mark, who I thought was, looking a little bit nervous in the first half. I'll talk about that in a minute. The ball spills to Will Dawson, and he bites off a really good but dangerous kick into the middle part of the ground, kicks it to a 2-on-1. It works out. Nick Larkey kicks the goal over the back again. That was his fourth for the quarter. That, for me, was a massive moment for Dylan Stephens with the running back with a fly. He's had issues with his physicality in the past, and that was putting his body on the line in the best possible way. And then I thought for Will Dawson, he grabbed the ball and just took off. It was a really great moment for him. He bombed it long to the middle of the ground, like I said. It was a dangerous kick, but it was there. And like I said, we had the 2-on-1, won that contest, and were able to kick the goal. So that was a massive moment, a big tick for Will Dawson, a big tick for Dylan Stephens in that contest. Finbar was getting his hands to a lot of balls, wasn't marking it in the first quarter, but was bringing it to ground, which is the most important part. He was making sure that the Dogs weren't able to take intercept marks. That's what enabled Larkey to have that shot for his fifth goal just after the siren. But yeah, a really, really promising first quarter after what looked like a bit of a shoddy start from us. We went in with some ascendancy, and I think there was some genuine optimism for how the game was going to go. That was pretty quickly quelled by the fact that Luke Davies-Uniacke was subbed out with concussion during the quarter time break. He copped an elbow to the head from Ed Richards. Ed Richards had the ball and then went for a bit of a don't argue. His elbow, I guess you could say innocuously, but the force was there. It was more just there was nothing untoward in what Ed Richards did. It was just a bit unlucky. It clipped LDU. We were able to get him off relatively quickly, had the HIA, and he was unable to come back on. So a big moment for the game. Obviously, our best midfielder. I thought he'd started the game pretty well as well. And, you're going up against Ed Richards and Marcus Bontempelli. You're going to want your best midfielders in there. So from that point on, it was, obviously Robert Hansen Jr. comes on as the sub. So you're not down a player, but there's certainly in no way a like for a like. We're already down Luke Parker and George Wardlaw, who are both, first choice midfielders. So what that meant was we saw a lot more of Jai Simpkin. We saw a lot more of Harry Sheezel in the middle, and obviously Will Phil, who hasn't been in the side, also was in a lot more centre bounce attendances. So the second quarter, I thought, for the most part, really continued on our strong work from the first quarter, despite that setback. Caleb Daniel has a costly turnover coming out of the back half after Griffin Logue had taken a nice intercept. That's the sort of stuff that hurts, and the sort of stuff that we've really got to find a way to stamp out of our game. I feel like I say that every week, so I won't overdo it, but it's those kinds of turnovers in the back half that cost us really easy goals to concede, and it means that we're up against it when we find it so hard to score. I thought to this point, Jakey Castandi was playing a really good shutdown role on Bailey Dale. He's one of those players that often gets off the chain against us. He's a halfback, a really nice kick. A good runner as well, and I thought Constanti, whilst he wasn't necessarily doing much of his own offensive work, he was doing a pretty good job of clamping Bailey Dale's ability to impact the contest. And I thought, Sam Darcy, I mentioned before he was looking a bit shaky. I thought he probably was owed a couple of free kicks in the first half, but I thought the way that we were playing him was very smart. Rather than going the arm chop, which is what a lot of teams are going to have to do just because of his height, and you hope that you get away with it, we're really working hard at bodying him. Will Dawson was his primary matchup. He was doing a really good job at either running him under the footy or just making sure that when they're flying for the footy, Will Dawson was making some really strong body contact, but fair body contact with Sam Darcy in the air, which was, I won't say it was putting him off his game. It was just not allowing him to take the marks that he normally would. But we saw in this quarter, despite these positives, we were our own worst enemy. Like there was a moment there where we were streaming forward. We looked like we had it under control. All of a sudden, we turn it over just from the Dogs' pressure and our inability to match it and find the free player. And Ballydale's goaling from a couple of broken tackles, which doubly hurts because to that point, Constanti's done a fantastic job on him. And then I don't think you could chalk that one up to Constanti because it was more about the turnover in the middle part of the ground. It's just so costly, those easy turnovers or those opportunities where you're about to launch forward and then the opposition is able to do that against you. I thought Robert Hansen Jr. came on and created a goal for Zurhaar out of not much at all on the wing. Created some nice plays. Zurhaar gold on the run from maybe 65. He was pretty lucky that it bounced through because probably the percentage option was to chip it over the top to Nick Larkey, who was running into some open space towards the goal square again. Could have been his sixth, but nonetheless, Zurhaar kicks the goal, and I thought that really gave us some momentum. Unfortunately, it was a really poor finish to the second half. Just conceded 2 goals late. We've seen that before. Red time conceding goals specialists we are. Will Dawson had a kick smothered coming out of defence that was by Sam Darcy that resulted in the Dogs pouncing, and then they got another one from stoppage. The centre clearance headed down our way, or their way rather. So that gave the Dogs, I think it was a 13-point lead maybe, but either way it was approximately a 2-goal lead at half-time. And we were definitely in the game, no doubt about it, particularly if you take away that lapse at the end of the second quarter. It was essentially all square, and it was a back-and-forth game. There'd been several lead changes, and like I mentioned, a really enjoyable game to watch. And holistically, I think that continued into the third quarter. It didn't change dramatically. It was a bit of a rough start with a lot of entries going against us. And sorry, when I say going against us, like the Dogs were having a lot of entries inside 50. But we saw Cooper Harvey bob up for his goal, a massive punt from about 50 metres on the boundary. I don't know for sure if he was going for it, but I'll pay it. It was a really nice goal from range. It shows his talent. It actually reminded me of the goal that he kicked for his first goal in the AFL when I remember it was against Geelong down at Candia Park, and similarly you sort of had the sense that he didn't quite have the kick in him and he just launched it and kicked the goal. From that moment on, it seemed as though we toyed with him in the back half. But that was fantastic. Then a Robert Hansen Jr. 50-minute penalty against, ran through the protected area, brought Sam Darcy into the game. I thought he'd had a pretty quiet first half. He'd taken a mark or gotten a free kick on the wing. The 50-minute penalty took him within range and he kicked a goal, and he ended with 3 for the game, so didn't get off the chain. But I do think that this was a moment where he was able to get into the game a little bit after not being able to hit the scoreboard in the first half, which hurts. We saw still, though, in the third quarter, we kept responding. Maley bobbed up for a mark inside 50 and kicked a goal. Zurhaar kicked another one just to keep us in touch going into three-quarter time. There were these moments where, we were just hanging in there, but I thought our endeavour and our pressure never relented. It was just what we were doing with the footy that was a little bit more problematic. With 10 minutes to go in the third quarter, it was, we had momentum. We were only a couple of goals down and we were right in it. But unfortunately, it's just these little moments that let us down. Wilfield had a shot from what looked to me like 40 metres out and didn't make the distance, which is just not good enough for an AFL footballer. We've seen that in the past with Jack Marnie, who played a forward half role and couldn't kick the ball more than 35 metres. Wilfield can. I'm not too sure what happened on that kick, but if you mark it inside 50 and that far inside 50, you've got to make the distance. That was disappointing. Will Dawson I've mentioned him a couple of times. He had a really, really good game. Had a great spoil on Sam Darcy and then a really nice shoulder barge on Vandermeer, which he followed it up with. Unfortunately, it spilled and Dale kicked another goal. But I thought the fact that Will Dawson just had a game where you looked at him and go, oh, this guy is a physical specimen. He is going to be hard to handle in the future, which is super important to be saying about a player this early in his AFL career. But like I said, going into three-quarter time, things we were on the precipice of being blown away, but we were still there after Zurhaar's goal. And then it really fell apart, really, to be honest. Tristan Xerri had an innocuous hit to the head, which left him dazed. He had to go off for a HIA. Unfortunately, he cleared that HIA, but by the time that had happened, he still had to sit off the ground, so he wasn't able to get back on. We toyed with a few things in the last quarter. Like I said, we saw Cooper Harvey in the back half. Dawson then had to come off due to a knock, and Darcy was able to kick another goal or two and get himself more into the game. We saw Will Dawson then swung forward with Larkey maybe off the ground due to that injury. So there was a few things that we toyed with in the last quarter. It was our worst quarter of the game, where the Dogs were able to kick a couple more in a row and put a bit more distance between themselves and us. And I thought, there was a nice moment. Wilfield, who I thought probably does need to do a bit more when the ball leaves stoppage. He's a good stoppage player, but not so good when we're trying to transition the ball through the middle part of the ground. But he had a nice moment where he took a nice mark and then was able to kick it sideways to McKercher in space, who then kicked a goal on the run. That's the kind of kick that you want from Wilfield, identifying those, the dangerous players and the kickers in the right spot. So that was a highlight, but yeah, the game just got away from us a little bit in this last quarter. And like I said, 49-point loss in the end. Did flatter the Dogs a fraction, but ultimately I think it was just more about the way that they wore us down, and they just kept plugging away and turning us over in dangerous positions. So yeah, 49-point loss in the end. A good response, I thought, in general from the Hawks game, but obviously would like a better result than what we're able to get. Story of the game is a pretty easy one, really. The inside 50 count was the biggest difference in this one. 65 to the Dogs and 43 to us. So, essentially we were 66% of their inside 50s, and, the efficiency numbers were pretty similar. It wasn't about the fact that the Dogs' forward line killed us. It was that they were able to get far more entries and therefore put far more on the scoreboard. We had 20 scoring shots to their 34. So, that does give you an idea of, I guess, the impact of those inside 50s. They were it's pretty simple stuff, really. We turned it over too often and in dangerous spots, allowed them too many opportunities, and they took them. Outside of that, I thought, we were really competitive. We won clearance. Our efficiency was really equal with theirs. Like I said, we tackled really well for the most part, and we didn't do a lot wrong. It was just the accumulation of, a couple of those small mistakes and our inability to transition the football, and that meant that the Dogs were able to have far more opportunities to kick goals. The margin did stretch a little as the game went on, but it wasn't a game where the Dogs got a massive run on and piled on goals. They wore us down, and ultimately we were undermanned, to be honest. Like, we've had the 5 outs or the 4 forced omissions from the previous week, and 3 of those experienced players. Then you have LDU go down in the first quarter with a concussion, and then you've got Larkey and Xerri that aren't able to run out the game for various reasons, or are certainly hampered throughout the game. So it's not an excuse. It's a reason. It's a reason that there was a bit of a fade out, and I think Xerri going out of the game coincided with our conceding a few more goals than we had otherwise in the last quarter. So all of these things add up to the result that we got. But I think when the game was on and when we were as up to the task as possible, the Dogs were just better at retaining possession, and as a result they were able to win that territory battle, get the ball into their half of the ground and lock it in with their halfbacks. Liberatore was fantastic. He played a really good game. His 250th, so it's a good game to perform well in. While we were much better than last week, the Dogs are a good side, and I think ultimately we'll be a little bit disappointed that I'm sure we'll be very disappointed, to be honest, but as a fan, I'm probably just a little bit disappointed that we weren't quite able to get a little bit closer. I think if we'd lost this game by 4 goals, you'd say fair enough, we gave it a crack, but the Dogs are just a goal better than us each quarter. But for it to blow out to 2 goals a quarter on average, a 49-point loss is a little bit disappointing, because I think our effort was there and our endeavour was there. I thought we had some really good strategic players. Like I said, Constanti worked well on Bailey Dale, despite the fact that he ended up with 2 goals. Will Dawson played a really good game to limit Sam Darcy's impact, and I'm sure he kicked 3, but he's the sort of player that could absolutely tear us apart on a different day. So, I think some of our tactical decisions were effective. I think that there was a lot that went right for us, but ultimately, it's the story that it's always been for the past, I don't know how long. We turned it over in dangerous spots, and we weren't able to effectively transition the ball often enough. McKercher and Caleb Daniel did their best, but they made some mistakes, and also I think up the ground there wasn't enough movement, wasn't enough creation of space. As a result of that, transitioning the footy was really hard. And yeah, the Dogs ultimately were able to beat us pretty comfortably in the end. And, I think, like I said, if we could peg this back 2 or 3 goals, I think we'd all feel a little bit more comfortable. But it is definitely an improvement on last week. And I think we have to take some solace in that fact because, boy, it was a shocker of a game against the Hawks. Shinboner of the week, and after last week not being able to select one, it was a pretty easy decision this week. It had to go Dylan Stephens for that gut-running spoil on Darcy that I mentioned. Led to the Will Dawson barrel down the middle of the ground for one of Larkey's goals. But it was just a highlight of the game for us, and the fact that it was just such a Shinboner running back with the flight, gutsy effort from a player not known for Shinboner gutsy efforts, I think was really good to see. And it's another example of Stephens' growth, given the big knock on his game has been his physicality and his want to put his body on the line. This was a fantastic showcase of what he can do in that space. His game was fine. He is going to get the 1 vote for this massive effort. It was a massive moment, and I thought he had an okay game, so I do think it's worth the 1 vote. But, his stats don't jump off the page. 16 disposals, 4 marks, went at 88% disposal effectiveness. Not a massive game, but on the back of this massive effort, I do think a massive Shinboner effort in a Centenary game, and just the highlight of it is not it's the totality. It's the combination of players making something happen. It's the fact that we're able to win that contest in the middle of the ground. It's the fact that we're able to execute and get the ball to our player out the back, and all of that stems from a player deciding to go for it, and that's what Dylan Stephens did. I think I think that at times last year I wondered why we had gotten him across, and I think most fans were probably thinking to themselves, gee, this isn't the player that we were hoping he would be. But, I don't know if it's a Clarko thing, if it's a midfield coach thing, if it's just the natural development that he's needed. But this year he's really blossomed. He for sure now he's cemented a spot in the side. I think he's got a couple of bad games in him before you'd consider dropping him now, which last year he was always a game away from being dropped, I thought. So a massive effort and a massive comeback, I guess you could call it, because last year he was nowhere near it. And Dylan Stephens is really proving himself at AFL level, which is fantastic. Let's get to the rest of the North Podium voting. Certainly couldn't find a 4 out of this game, and I couldn't really find a 3 voter either. So we've got some 2s and 1s. I've got 3 that got the 2 votes. McKercher, 32 touches, 9 marks, 555 metres gained, 3 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, kicked the goal. Tried his absolute best off half-back. Absolutely, he's still biting off some tricky kicks and they're not quite coming off, but ultimately that is his job. I understand that's his job. He's gonna turn it over a bit because he's trying to create. And I thought, 2 votes. He played a good game. He did what he could. I still think there are times where he could make better decisions. I think he's generally a good kick, but sometimes his decision-making, where he's kicking it, can improve. But I think ultimately he's got to get the miles and the legs, and then he's got to have that experience. So I'm totally happy giving him that experience at the moment. We're not in a position where, if he turns it over, which he does regularly at the moment, it's not a big deal in the scheme of, he's not ruining the season for anyone. It's part of the course, actually, for a North Melbourne side. So he's often biting off tricky kicks, and I think this was one of his better games for the year. So McKercher 2, Larkey 5 goals. You've got to give him at least 2 votes for a 5-goal performance. 4 goals in that first quarter, and then kicked another in the second quarter. And 5 goals, 9 disposals, 6 marks, 4 of those contested, which is fantastic. Obviously did drift out of the game in the second half when he was hampered, and like I said, Logue was moved on to him at times, which was a much better matchup. And I think holistically, if you took out the first half, he's not getting any votes. But a 5-goal performance in a game like this, you can't ignore. And I think it's fantastic that he's been able to, despite the absolute drubbing we copped last week against the Hawks, he found some form. He's continued that into this game. Hopefully his injury is just a bit of soreness, and he's able to get up for next week. We can't afford to have another senior player missing in action, but I haven't heard too much about whether or not that was a serious injury or not. And then the last two voter has to be for Will Dawson. Not a big disposal game, obviously. 8 touches, 3 marks, 4 tackles, 3 hit-outs. He did go into the ruck a little bit in the last quarter with Xerri off. He essentially became the second ruck. 6 intercepts, 8 spoils, but I thought the job that he did on Sam Darcy was absolutely phenomenal. I spoke mostly about it earlier on, but it's his physicality. His work rate was fantastic. The way that he was able to use his body for body spoils on Sam Darcy was really smart. And it's only game 5 for him, so it's all up from here. I thought he played a fantastic game. And at least one, I think maybe even 2 of Sam Darcy's goals were kicked with absolutely nothing to do with Will Dawson. So you could almost say the near perfect defensive game, and did some nice things offensively as well for Will Dawson. So 2 votes, super exciting game for a player that we hope is a big part of our future. And then we get into the 1 vote. So Dylan Stephens, I already mentioned, got the 1 vote, and Shinboner of the week. Tommy Powell was probably our best midfielder, 25 disposals, 4 marks, 8 tackles, 6 clearances, a goal assist. Does need to improve his disposal in transition. There was a few dump kicks that he'd probably like back. 68% disposal effectiveness says that he could have been a little bit cleaner with the footy, but in a game where he simply had to step up because our other mids were either injured or not playing, I thought it was important that he did that, and he did just that. So Tommy Powell gets the 1 vote, played his role, I think. And there's a few here in the same position, really. Paul Curtis played his role. A quiet game, kicked a goal, 7 touches, 4 tackles, 3 goal assists is the big important part there. 3 inside 50s. He impacted every contest that he got near. He did drop a mark or 2 that I thought normally he would take. So that is a downer, but the tackles were all inside 50. 3 goal assists says he was getting involved directly in scores. So Paul Curtis, I think, does deserve a vote for playing his role in that front half. Similarly, Cam Zurhaar, 10 disposals, 2 goals, 4 marks, 1 of those contested, 3 tackles, 2 goal assists. Just played his role. He found it really hard to get involved in the game. I think he had 2 touches a fair while into the game. It took him a while to get going, but like I mentioned, was able to kick the 2 goals and have 2 goal assists, and brought himself into the game. So played his role, I thought, in a game where it was hard to get involved. Harry Sheezel, 22 disposals, 1 goal, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 3 clearances. Spent more time in the middle, and I think was probably second fiddle to Tommy Powell in the middle, but played a consistent role through the middle part of the ground and a little bit forward, so I think worth a vote for him. Tristan Xerri, 17 disposals, 5 tackles, 30 hit-outs, 8 to advantage, 7 clearances, a goal assist. Missed the majority of the last quarter, but I thought battled really well against English. Played his role, similar to the other week. It wasn't a standout game for Xerri, but I think probably just won the ruck battle with Team English. Did let himself down a little bit where he probably should have been running back with a bit more care and keeping an eye on Team English defensively, but he's a really good contested player, Xerri, and like I said, missed most of the last quarter, certainly a big chunk of the last quarter, but played a really good game. And finally, Griffin Logue, who has been out of favour. He's been back in the side for the last couple of weeks. 12 spoils is the big one for him. 13 disposals, 6 marks. I think the fact that Will Dawson and Toby Pink were able to match up on Norton and Sam Darcy allowed him, Logue that is, a bit of time to be that interceptor or third man up. Wasn't able to take a heap of intercept marks, but was certainly able to impact a lot of contests with those 12 spoils. Sure, Pink was, didn't have probably had his second week in a row where he wasn't fantastic. Got turned around by Gunston, and then this week it was Aaron Norton who was having a really good game. But at least that means that Logue can play this role, and I thought, probably his best game for the year. Played his role. Wasn't a fantastic game by any stretch, but I think most of the contests he was involved in were a net positive for us, and so worthy of the vote. And that's it. So going over the votes, McKercher, Larkey, and Will Dawson, 2 votes. And then 1 vote for Stephens, Powell, Curtis, Zurhaar, Sheezel, Xerri, and Griffin Logue. That leaves us with the North Podium standings. Tristan Xerri still out on top on 20, Harry Sheezel 19, LDU 16, Luke Parker 15, Paul Curtis up to 14, Powell 13, McKercher and Larkey 12, and McDonald and Zurhaar 11. So that's what the top of the leaderboard looks like heading into the last or the final third of the season. Thank you so much for being a supporter of North Pod. I do really appreciate it. And if you'd like to get involved with the show any further, you can follow me on social media at NorthPod Show. And you can also support me at the Buy Me a Coffee link. The link is in the show notes. It's buymeacoffee.com/NorthPodShow. Thank you to all my loyal listeners, and I appreciate everyone who tunes in every week to hear me ramble about footy for 45 minutes. Kanga clipboard time, and I spoke about him before, but Will Dawson, I think, is worth another couple of minutes. It's his 5th game of football, and he looks every bit the key position player that we're looking for the future. Like I said, he bullied the Dogs when he had the chance, played a really smart physical game on Sam Darcy, and took the game on when he had the when he had the opportunities to. So I think the only question now for me is which end of the ground will he play, most his footy at. At this stage, you'd have to be odds on to say it's down in defence. We've certainly toyed or experimented with him in the forward line, both at AFL and VFL level. So there's an opportunity for him to play forward. But when he plays this well in defence, it's hard to move him away from that. I think, I'd much prefer to see someone like Charlie Comben play forward because that's a more natural role for him. Long term, I'm talking about, not necessarily right now. He looks at home down back. I think that's where I'd be keeping him. But for his 5th game to be this kind of role, I know, it's a low sample size. It's his 2nd game for the year. And, he hasn't played a lot of AFL football, but it's just the size of him that really impresses me. He's really mobile for a player his size, looks strong. He's filled out pretty well for a player only in his 2nd year and a really young 2nd-year player. My understanding is in that draft he was one of the youngest taken, if not the youngest. So massive opportunity for him in the second part of the year. We'll have to see if and when Chom's fit what happens there, but I think it's definitely worth getting some games into Will Dawson if he's going to continue to play like this. Maybe we swing him forward if we absolutely have to because of personnel, but he looks really settled into a defensive position to me, and I thought this was if any game was one to showcase the fact that he's got a future as a defender, this would be the one for me. Someone who I'm not sure does have a future as a defender is Cooper Harvey, and I think for me it's a bit of a question of why is he playing that role? Is it because of the injuries, and we just thought let's get a player of his skill set down there because we know he knows how to find the footy? Is it because we genuinely think that's a position that could work for him? I find that hard to believe. Strange things happen, to be clear. Like there's always positional changes happening. Within season, out of season. Like it happens. But Cooper Harvey to me does seem as though he's more of a high half forward or a stay-at-home small forward as opposed to a half-backer. So that makes me think it's either reason 1, that it was just a bit of an injury necessity thing, or reason 2, or reason 3, and that is that we're just trying something before we delist him. We make sure that there's not a different position that we can play him in. I thought he looked okay in this game, like I mentioned during the review. I thought he got involved pretty early, kicked a really nice goal, and then when he was playing off half-back, did some nice things, had a kick out where he just decided to kick to himself, even though you don't have to anymore, which was a funny one. But yeah, I don't know what to make of Cooper Harvey at halfback, just because it's not a role that he's ever played as far as I'm aware. Like, he may have spent some time recently in the VFL there, but I more mean prior to this year, I doubt he would have played a halfback role. He's definitely more of a natural forward. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's great that we're able to get him in for a game, knowing that he's coming out of contract. I would hope that he gets at least a couple of games to showcase what he can do. Same with Wilfield, same with Zane Dersma. When you have injuries like this and you've got a lot of players coming in, I think it's important they get a good opportunity of 2 or 3 games before you're dropping them again. So I do hope that he'll be allowed another game to ply his trade. I don't think he was poor by any stretch, so I think there's every chance that he will be back, but I guess just worth mentioning that. And then I think in relation to Cooper Harvey and Will Dawson, I think it's worth talking about just how young this side that stepped on the field was. Really young and inexperienced group, so it gives us a bit more of an opportunity to see what our future team balance might look like. Now, obviously, there's still some older players in the side, like Griffin Logue's an older player, and he's not necessarily one that you'd expect to be in our long-term plans. But for the most part, we're seeing a really young side that this is where you've got to ask yourself how many of these young players are going to go on to be 150, 200 game players for us. So looking at the absolute inexperience, the most inexperienced, as I mentioned, Will Dawson, 5th game, Riley Hardiman, 15, Zane Duursma, 20, Finn O'Sullivan, 15, Cole McKercher, 32, Toby Pink, 25. He's a little bit different, though, as a mature age player and someone that spent a fair bit of time on AFL lists. He probably sits a little bit differently to the rest of these. Cooper Harvey, 4 games, Fiona Malley, 5, Constanti, 16, Robert Hansen Jr., 17. That's a lot of players that are 32 games and under. You could probably add in Will Phil, who hasn't reached 50 games yet as well. He's another one to talk about. So a really, really young side. And I think we got to look at, how many of these do we think are going to be really long-term prospects for us. I think if I had to guess right now, looking at the list, I think Will Dawson will be. I'm pretty sure Riley Hardiman will be, but you just never know. That it's pretty easy to find good half-backers. And so I think Riley Hardiman is one of those. But I guess the reason that I say that is, he is the sort of player that you can find plenty like him if he doesn't quite develop the way we want him to. But right now, I think he's tracking in the right direction. Duursma is a watch. Not just because there's talk that he's a bit disgruntled, but more so because I'm not sure yet whether his physical attributes are up to AFL standard. We know that he's a really good mark, but not that he's showcased that too often this year at AFL level, but we know that he has that skill set. I just don't know where he fits into the side. He's not big enough to be a key forward, that's for sure, and he doesn't have the tank at the moment to play a midfield role, so I'm not sure where he fits in. Finn O'Sullivan, I think, is going to be a gun. McKercher is going to be a gun. Like I said, Pink might actually be a good medium-term player for us, but because of his age profile, it's probably unlikely he's going to be a really long-term player. Cooper Harvey right now, I'd be saying no, is not going to make 150 games. Finbar Maley is an interesting one. I'd be betting against him just because he's so raw. I really hope that he comes on. I really hope that he is a long-term player for us. But he is a project. He's a rookie player. He's a player that right now his kicking is unreliable at best. So he's probably one that we're hoping we can find one with him, but no one's going to be shocked if he doesn't make it, just because like I said, rookie listed player and someone that we've plucked with just the hope that he's going to develop. Constanti, I'm on the fence with. I think similar to Riley Hardiman, his sort of player is not necessarily that difficult to find. A pressure forward, it's much harder to find a pressure forward who's also a goal sneak, which I don't think we could put Constanti in that bracket yet. So if I was betting right now, I'd probably say he won't make it. And same with Robert Hansen Jr. Shows flashes, and I think we've seen this year and at the end of last year that his best is brilliant. It's just whether or not he's able to do that consistently enough, and whether he has the physicality at AFL level. So I guess going through that, we've got some definite ticks in my mind. Funnily enough, most of them are higher draft picks, and some question marks, and probably some ones that I'm pretty certain probably won't make it. But ultimately, I think what's going to measure our success or our ability to grow as a club is how many of these players go on and become absolute first choice players, because we know someone like, who could I pick? I mean, LDU is the easy example. We know he's going to be a long-term prospect. Sheezel we know. Larkey we know, or I guess at least medium-term given his age profile. There's players playing that we know are going to be there long-term. But it's the younger group that you're wanting to know that these games you're investing in them right now is going to count for something later on. And I certainly hope that is the case. And my last note here for Kanga Clipboard, I think the fact that there was a response after the Hawks game was crucial. It wasn't, at the end of the day, the margin that we were looking for. It did blow out, but it was just important that we competed and we tackled hard and we pressured, and I think we did that. I think we can hold our heads relatively high with how this went. At the end of the day, we did lose, and it was a 50-point margin or a 49-point margin, so that is disappointing. But you couldn't stand there and say it was, we didn't try. We did try. There was effort. It just wasn't quite enough to get us across the line. So I think a step in the right direction, even if it wasn't, the win or the highly competitive game we might have wanted. And finally, around Arden Street, there was a VFL game. Friday night footy was, I think. Yeah, Friday night footy. A 16-point loss to the Footscray Bulldogs, so obviously the Western Bulldogs VFL side, 87-71. And as a result of so many AFL-listed players being injured and therefore having to get some extras from the VFL, not as many, fringe players playing in this game. Geordie Payne kicked 2 goals from 13 disposals. CCJ continued his return to AFL footy, or to VFL footy rather, his return to footy, I should say. 18 disposals, 7 marks, 17 hit-outs. I mean, Josh Goda played his first competitive footy for the year, which is promising. Eddie Ford kicked a goal. Banch kicked a goal. Whitlock had 17 disposals, but none of these are players that you'd expect to be knocking on the door for selection for next week. Important that we've got some players performing, but we weren't able to get the chocolate, so probably not expecting any of them to jump into the side for next week, particularly given the fact that if we were going to have some players returning, it's probably going to be from injury as opposed to coming from the VFL. The other news, or I guess significant event, was that Centenary celebration. And I thought, just to go over it again, it was fantastic to see. It was really good to see so many former players involved, even the types that don't necessarily get to the football much. I know Cunners was there, which is fantastic. That huddle before the game with Dennis Pagan speaking to the group and everyone in there as a group. It's spine-tingling stuff. It's special. And I think, for me, it kind of franks the hard work that this club has done to stay in Melbourne, to stay afloat, which is really tough financially. I know that cynics will say, well, the AFL, significantly helps in that area. And that is true. The AFL does support its clubs, but we're not a private, clubs aren't privately owned in this system. Members work hard, teams work hard to make sure that they are able to stay afloat. And I think the fact that we've been able to get to 100 years centenary celebration is credit to the club and the supporters for sticking around for this long. Certainly, in my lifetime, there's been a couple of opportunities where maybe North Melbourne was going to head off somewhere else, particularly the Gold Coast. That was really, for me, one of the turning points where I, as a teenager at the time, thought, all right, I'm going to get along to games, I'm going to buy a membership, I'm going to support this team because I want them to stay in Melbourne. Ironically now, I think if we did relocate and we were able to keep most of our identity, I don't think I'd be opposed to that if financially it made sense. The identity thing is important though. Like, I'd want the team colours to stay the same. I'd want the Kangaroos to still be the mascot. So, it's probably unlikely that all of that would happen in a relocation should it happen. But I hope it doesn't. I hope that we're able to eventually build to a 20-club competition where North Melbourne is not relocated and we're able to stay a strong Melbourne-based side and, hopefully one day have a 200-year celebration. I certainly won't be around for it, but I do hope that is something that we can look forward to in the future. Speaking of which, let's look ahead quickly to next week's game, which is against Melbourne. A very, very winnable game. We belted them earlier in the year. Marvel Stadium, this one is at the MCG on Sunday the 13th of July, a 1-10 game, so your first game for a Sunday. And like I mentioned, beat them earlier in the year. Unless the Dees are able to beat the Crows, who, as I'm recording this, are playing tomorrow, a win will take us above them on the ladder, which would be a massive step in the right direction. I think it's important that we keep moving our way up the ladder. One, because obviously we want to improve, and two, I think because we've traded out that first draft pick, for me, it's important that we move as high as we can this year so that we can, I guess, justify that to our supporters that trading out that number one draft or round one draft pick wasn't going to be an absolute star. I understand this draft is reported to be a weaker draft, so you've got to put that on the table as well. But it's important to win. So if we weren't able to win this game, it pretty much means we probably won't go past Melbourne. It's it's the old 8-point game, but just for the bottom half of the ladder. Another game at the G, which we don't play a lot of football there, so a huge chance to prove ourselves. We won last time out there, so it'll be good to do again. And unfortunately, we're still going to be on demand. It's just to what extent. We're certainly not going to get everyone back from injury. I would imagine Wardlaw is going to have at least another week off. I can't imagine we're going to risk him at all, and certainly some of those other players looking pretty sore. And then we came out with some injuries from this game, so We're definitely not going to be at full strength, but we saw in this game that, players were able to come in and have an impact and compete. And, particularly those players that are playing for their next contract, like Will Phillips, like Cooper Harvey, you want to see them really stamping themselves on the game and, putting their hand up for a contract for next year. So, big game, obviously not in the context of the AFL season. It's not one that, every neutral is going to be excited about watching. But I think as a North fan, we should be super excited and looking forward to this game because it's another opportunity to move ourselves up the ladder, notch another win and continue, besides last week, what's been some pretty good form. So hopefully we're able to do that. Hopefully it's not a disappointment. I do hope the weather's nice. From the perspective of, I think wet weather football will bring us down a little bit. Melbourne's not in great form, so they're ripe for the picking still. They haven't recovered since we belted them earlier in the year. But yeah, hopefully we're able to get the job done because I do think competing against Melbourne in this context is simply not enough. I think we do have to win. I do caveat that, though, that I don't know exactly how many first choice players we're going to have available. But even so, we saw that we've got enough talent in this side now to compete with sides that aren't elite. So Melbourne is definitely in that category, not elite. Hopefully Xerri's all right. Going into a game against Max Gawn without Xerri would be a big concern. But yeah, looking forward to this game because it's one that we definitely should be right into it up to our necks. So thank you again for listening. I do really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and I hope you have a fantastic week. I've got my school holidays to look forward to as a teacher, so I'm looking forward to some time with my son and some time recuperating. I hope that you also have a fantastic week and I will speak to you after that game against the Dees. As always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.